Welcome to Speak Up, the television arm of Freemasonry New Zealand. I am your host, Barry Rushton. My first guest is a man called Steve Sim. He's the kind of guy that you always want to be friends with, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Following him will be our second guest, and again, he's a man you wouldn't want to pick a fight with. He is a master swordsman, and it's Jesse Siegel. And rounding out the show is our regular contributor, Graham Houston. He's had his head in the clouds. Well, in actual fact, he's had his head in space. He's found a great famous Freemason, and he's going to tell us all about him. Steve, wonderful to have you on the show, mate. Thank you for being here this evening.
Wonderful to see you.
Now listen, you know, you and I, if we ever go to a function and we don't know people too well, you know, and sometimes people come around and say, oh, what do you do for a living? And it's quite easy to say, well, I'm a plumber or I'm an electrician. You can actually say, I own a brewing company. Yeah. No wonder people want to be friends with you. What?
Very, very quickly, they gravitate towards me to have a couple of beers and talk some stories and hopefully get the odd free one slipped in.
Any daughter who's got boyfriends, mate, they just say, I love that bloke.
Yeah, I'm a bit concerned about that. But I'm sure that one day, you know, Dad owns a brewery and everyone will flock around us.
Exactly. What I love having you on the show for is because, you know, years and years ago, there was really only two beers on the market. You either had sort of Lion or DB, something like that. And I remember as a kid, I used to deliver milk. And come Christmas time, the people would actually like to give a beer, you know, or something to the milkman, you know, and they'd put out a bottle, you know, and it was those big quart bottles, you know, and the flagons that you used to buy. Yep. Man, this world has changed.
Oh, it's changed immensely, but it's also gone back to the same that it was many years ago. In the 1800s or early 1900s, there were over about 300 breweries in New Zealand.
Far out.
And they all got bought up over time and turned into places like Dominion Breweries and Lion Breweries and then a start-up back in the early 90s called Independent started up out in Papakura, starting with RTDs really, and then moving on to things like beer. So at that point, probably about 15 years ago, there were really only about 3 major breweries and a couple of small ones. Now, 2018, there's well over 200. 200.
It's unbelievable. And when I say I can sort of vouch for that, because if I go to the supermarket, I'm not really a beer drinker. I mean, I love to have a beer after doing the lawns or playing golf. I mean,
yes.
But, you know, and I'm a wine bloke, you know, I just am. So, but now if I'm in the supermarket, I use the supermarket, man, it's like a candy store. You know, all the different craft beers. It's incredible.
Yeah, so the label craft beer came around because it wasn't one of the big breweries. Yeah. And so we all got together, so to speak, and went, oh, let's go and compete against these guys with our own brew kits. And sure enough, you finally find that there's a lot of brewers out there that make commercially good beer and of very different styles. So you've got your styles, which is what I call lawnmower beer. Your Pilsners, you just scoff those back after going for a run or doing the lawns. Yeah. Through to the more challenging beers, such as your big IPAs, your India Pale Ales, or your big stouts and porters and things like that. Things that you'd drink while you're eating a big steak, and so things like that. So all of these different styles with big flavours have really come out from the craft beer fraternity, whereas the major breweries were constantly making beer and still do make beer that is just easily quaffable. So yeah.
Well, you see, it's a bit like wine styles, you know, there's like reds, there's sort of 3 or 4 styles under a red. Let's forget all the million styles that are out there at other countries. But generally, you know, your Merlots, your Pinot Noirs, Shirazes, and the whites are, you know, Chardonnays and Pinot Gris and sort of... Now, beers, there must be sort of like a standard group of them, is there, that most of you would tend to make?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there's about 4 or 5 styles that seem to be popular for craft beer brewers to make, and those are the Pilsners, the Pale Ales, the India Pale Ales, or IPAs as they're known, your double IPAs or stronger beers, and your stouts or porters. So the dark beers. And the way to visually think about it is that if you think light beer as in yellow, right through to dark beer of black, that's the kind of spectrum that you're dealing with. But again, like that spectrum, there are hundreds of styles underneath that spectrum that all feed into the styles of beers that there are.
Great. You see, the making of a beer, I mean, we won't go into that, but generally it's a fairly sort of it's a process that you tend to follow. You get it, you crush up the malt or the barley or whatever, and you mix that, and then so on and so forth, right?
Yes.
Eventually, the hops or the flavouring will go on towards the end. So consequently, how do you alter the taste or the style of beer through that production process?
Yeah, so there are 4 main ingredients in beer: water, malt, hops, and of course, without yeast, it's not beer.
So
a combination of all of that. If you can think of one of those big soundboards at a concert where you're adjusting the sound levels, you're doing the same thing with those ingredients. So for instance, with the water chemistry, you're playing with that depending on the style of beer that you're making. With the malt, you've got different malt depending on the style of beer that you're making and how long you boil it for, etc. And then with the hops, you're using a variety of hops or even just one hop, depending on the flavour that you want. And then you throw the yeast in, and there are different styles of yeast.
Okay, great, yeah, great.
That produce different styles of yeast. So, for instance, Belgian yeast comes off with this very wonderful banana aroma when you're drinking it, whereas some of the standard commercial pale ale yeasts, you don't really smell or taste them. They're just there producing alcohol. And so, in that respect, if you've got that recipe just right, you come up with some amazing beer.
Wow. And that recipe can be reproduced? I mean, you can sort of say, right, we've got this right, we've got the temperature right, we've got it done. Does it fluctuate a little bit, or you can pretty well nail it?
Well, you pretty much nail it most of the time. The big breweries do what they do is continuous brewing, so they basically start at one end and it's constantly flowing, whereas batch brewing is what craft beer is about generally. So every batch is treated differently, and yes, maybe there might be a cloudy day and it's slightly different, but at the end of the day, we strive to make the same thing. And so that's what the brewers do. They sit there and say, we let this rest for this much time and blah, blah, blah. And so the next guy picks it up and goes, right, we'll follow the same thing.
That intrigues me also too, because the production in the big houses, of course, they've got the gear, they've got the big vats, they've got everything. So do you then take your ingredients to a big manufacturer, or do you have your own gear? How does that generally work?
Well, so with craft brewing, there's two different kind of brewers or brewing companies. There's guys that go out there and purchase their own equipment and set up big breweries. Like there's a really amazing facility at Hallertau Brewery in Kumeu in Auckland. And the guy, Steve Plowman's an amazing brewer, and he's got all this equipment there. So he's put his investment in making the best beer on his equipment.
Gotcha.
What we've done at Birkenhead Brewing Company is actually hire someone who's already got that equipment, and we bring the ingredients along with our recipe ideas, and then we just make that happen.
So you've got to book a time, so to speak.
Yeah, so you are booking time slots of when these guys are going to make your beer and keep it going. So contract brewing and your own brew. Whereas the big breweries, obviously, they've spent millions and millions of dollars.
Now, I think you've brought one of your samples along, have you? I'm dying to have a look at them, because they're all different and great. This is one of your beauties. This is the BBC.
This is my flagship beer, the first one that I started with, which is called the Kauri. And we launched that back in 2015, our first ever beer. And people thought I was mad because it's a double IPA. Now, craft brewers generally go, wow, double IPA, that's a massive, strong beer. And you started with that, and we made a statement and we came out with that.
Great. Now, you haven't been in this entity or this business for a long time, have you? You're quite new at it.
No, I do start-up companies and things that really interest me. And in my last company, I was in Silicon Valley working in San Francisco, and I had this epiphany during America's Cup when I was drinking this beer on the wharf, and outside the gate of the wharf there was this amazing choice of beer that I could go and drink. I went, wow, there's something in this beer stuff. What is going on in New Zealand? Not much. And so I just quietly bided my time and came across a report about the New Zealand industry and went, that's my next semi-retirement project, which is being far from semi-retirement, I can tell you.
Now, the demographic for people buying beer is also changing, right? I mean, there's a lot of ladies who will now quite openly have, I'll have a nice beer, thanks very much. You know?
Well, this is the wonderful thing about beer. It's not gender-specific. And it never has been. It's a bit of old thinking, this thing, blokes drink beer. It's not the case at all. And what we find is that women and men love drinking different styles of beer. And, we sit there at our tasting studio and watch it happening. And it's a wonderful thing to see, because like the old days where there was only two choices, nowadays you've got hundreds of choices and different experiences.
And in Freemasonry, of course, at the end of a meeting, we will always have a little refractory time. And I'm sure in days gone by, they were a lot heavier drinkers than what any of us are now, but we like also at times to have a beer, Tell us a little bit about your entry into Freemasonry, what do you love about it, why you continue. I think you're with the lodge, aren't you? A lodge called Kauri, is that correct?
Indeed, and it's just quite coincidental that my beer is named after my lodge. But, and that makes for a great story among all of the brethren. It's quite fun. But I went into Freemasonry with my brother Paul Ashley and his father Jeff Ashley, and when I was 21, I got pulled through into Papatoetoe 227, and that was an amazing experience at that time, and I'm talking early 80s.
Wow.
So that was a great deal of fun. And I'm that guy that's quietly in the background in terms of
yeah.
Freemasonry, secretary, treasurer, these kind of things. And for me,
enjoy
it's
the
been
participation,
amazing.
but not necessarily looking to go through all the chairs. And
One
things like
day,
that.
one day.
Yeah,
but I've been certainly busy with my external activities of raising a family, running businesses and things like that. And that I'd love to go for the chair, but when the time's right. But certainly I find my usefulness as being around the lodge.
Well, I'm sure the members of your lodge say, yeah, let's get Steve. Steve, we need to get Steve in the refectory.
Seems to be the case.
Now, you've got a couple of books on there too, haven't you, that you've bought? These very quickly are, will you tell us what they're about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you really want to know about the history of beer in New Zealand, these are two great books to do. The History of Beer, which was one of the first written books ever on New Zealand beer, published by Lion Breweries way back when. So clearly it gives you a good history of right back to the Captain Cook days when he made his own beer on board and how he basically put sprig, ferns in his beer and made that work. And this one from Michael Donaldson, who is actually currently the Writer of the Year for the Brewers Guild and Beer Nation. So he's got 2 editions of this book out, which give you a very good outlook of that. So well worth reading and picking up, and very easy reads as well over a weekend to figure out the history.
Well, we certainly wish the Birkenhead Brewing Company great. We know you've got a nice little bar in Birkenhead itself, right?
Yes.
And that's a great little spot to go. I've never been myself, because I'm not a great beer drinker, but I will drop down.
Oh, we've got fine wine there too, Barry.
Oh, have you? Oh, you've caught me out. Steve, thank you for being a great guest today. We really wish you all the best for your company. And thank you for being here with us this evening. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Our second guest tonight is Jesse Seeger. Nice to see you, my friend. You are a master swordsman.
Yes,
and
sir.
I love it. I mean, it's just a scary thing for me, to be quite frank. I know. Tell us a little bit about your love of swords. I know you've got a company. It's called Imperial Swords. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And you stock swords, or you sell swords to people. Tell me about the range you have. Tell me about the people who buy them. Tell me everything about swords.
Not a problem. So my love for swords started when I was 6 years old. I was playing soccer and I heard sounds of martial artists practicing from a courtyard next to the park. And I decided, as a 6-year-old does, to climb the wall and have a look, curiosity. So I did that, and I slipped and I fell inside. And
fell into the yard.
Yes, yes.
All good.
Essentially took me under his wings and started teaching me martial arts, and from there went on to weapon training and swords and whatnot. So the first time I held a sword, I was absolutely stunned by the glimmer of the blade, so to speak. And that's where my love for swords started, or anything bladed, bladed weapons. So fast forwarding, came to New Zealand, and I always wanted to collect swords or have one of my own. And I started looking around where I can buy a real sword. And unfortunately, there's a lot of wall hangers or display swords around, which are not real swords. So I decided I'll go straight to the manufacturers, and I started inquiring with museums. And one thing led to another, and I ended up starting Imperial Swords, where now we stock around 300 different swords from all eras: Japanese, Chinese, European, Indian, you name it. And these are all handmade swords, hand forged, and a lot of collectors globally.
And we're talking proper swords, aren't we?
Yes.
We're talking the real deal, not the pretend ones, right?
No,
these
no,
are hello
no.
ones, aren't they?
No, these are real weapons.
Yes.
They come in variety of flavors, and when I say flavors, I mean sharpness. So you can get fully sharpened swords, which again are treated like weapons by the customs and arms officers. But again, you also have staged weapons, which are mostly made out of aluminium to look realistic.
Right.
But the swords that we sell are all real swords.
But even a dull sword's going to do some damage, isn't it? I mean,
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
you see, on your website, I looked at it, and you're quite right. The actual styles of swords are immense from different kinds, and the number of people making them. I mean, the number of companies who actually make swords of all kinds is quite staggering. I mean, I was surprised like you wouldn't believe.
It took me about 10 years of research to find manufacturers or sword makers globally, and it was a tough job to try and convince them why I wanted to purchase from them.
Yes.
These sword companies usually make swords as replicas for museums. And when I told them what my interests were and the fact that I'm a martial artist and I train with weapons as well, I managed to build a good relationship. And today I own Imperial Swords, which is one of the fourth largest online swords website globally.
Fantastic. And so, as I said, you mentioned it briefly before about the customs. I mean, you can't just sort of wander into New Zealand carrying a sword. They send them out to you from America, right?
Yes.
And so you must have had a devilish job to actually get them from customs to your house.
Well, in reality, a sword can be purchased and brought into the country without any problem, and when I say problem, I mean firearm license, because it's not a concealable weapon. And it is usually treated as a display item or a movie prop. Okay. But if it is sharpened, then it becomes a weapon grade, and that's when you have to declare it to the customs. The customs then require you to give them an explanation why you want to own this particular item. And if you say you're a collector, they usually want to see a history of collection or a theme. Okay. But anything which is under 45 centimeters is considered a concealable weapon. So we are talking batons, we are talking arrowheads, we are talking daggers, knives. These can all be concealed, which means you could walk around on the street
with it in your jacket or something.
Absolutely.
You've got a sword here with you tonight. Tell us a little history about this one. What kind of sword it is? Where that one came from?
Yeah.
Is that was that over 45 centimeters? Under? Is that?
It is just on the borderline of 45 centimeters, and this particular one is a real dagger.
Wow.
Now, this is an arming dagger, so it is slightly bigger than a usual dagger would be. A usual dagger would be about that long. This is an arming dagger used by Knights Templars. Okay. And you will see it has the crossguard, cullions, and a cross sign as well. And this is a fully sharpened, hand-forged dagger. So for bringing this into the country, obviously I had to go through the arms office and put in a request and whatnot. And there's a misconception that medieval weapons were very, very heavy. Now, this dagger is about 800 grams. So it's...
It really is, it does feel good in your hand, but I'd like to give it back to you.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So as a weapon specialist, of course, I really admire the way the weapon looks, the way it balances, the way it works. So yes, it is intriguing.
So that sword would have been used in close combat sort of thing?
Yes, so imagine two knights in a melee combat and their swords are locked, but the other hand is free. So that's when he would pull out the dagger.
Say hi.
And precisely. So
now I know also that you're a fight instructor, correct? And the martial arts is your training, but you also have a school, and that's where you also train actors who have a fight that looks real, but nobody gets hurt.
Absolutely.
Sure. It's staggering. So how do you teach someone quickly to actually do that? I mean, there must be certain moves you use, or
absolutely, it's all choreographed, and the biggest idea is to maintain safety, not only for the performing artists, but also for the crew. Because like you said, if they were swinging a sword and the sword flew, that could be devastating and the production could be closed. So what we do is when an actor comes on board for training, we take them through a rigorous training of about 10 to 15 weeks minimum, and it's 4 hours every week, full on going for the training. So they start with the basics of martial combat. We teach the students what martial combat techniques are, or the discipline basics are, because once you understand how a person can get hurt, you can ensure that you take steps.
There's another thing too which I kind of like, and it's not just getting people like that. You actually have a thing called sword fit,
Yes.
where it's a bit like CrossFit in my view, but it's not, but the same sort of thing, where people can actually get fit and actually do. Now that's intriguing. I like it, and you have a number of people who do those classes.
Yes. So I decided to start the sword fit as a fitness regime rather than a combat training. So when people come on board, we take them through the training, and it's a full aerobic and anaerobic workout.
Great, excellent. It sounds fascinating. It sounds like something I should do. Yes. Now tell me, you were born in India but raised in England. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how did you start your Masonic journey? Where did that begin? When you came to New Zealand?
Well, it kind of began when I was about 10 years old.
Wow.
My uncle was one of the first Grand Masters in Paris. I just had to be in it. And when I walked in, it's about 14 odd years since I've been in Freemasonry now. And I think I've missed twice.
Well, I know you're excited. I know that you're enthused about it because I've seen you out in Masonic lodges and meetings, and you always are enthusiastic. I saw you the other night, and you were terrific in the job you were doing. Didn't you get married? And what? Tell us the marriage story. I know there's something hiding in there.
Yes. Well, that's how much I love Freemasonry. That me and my wife, we are both members of Eastern Star, which was a conjoined Freemasonry, which unfortunately has died out now in New Zealand. But
still in Wellington.
Oh, that's good.
Still in Wellington. 2 lodges in Wellington.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, but she also enjoyed Freemasonry quite a bit. So I decided that when it came time for us to get married, I asked her, how would you like us to get married? Do you want a church wedding, a big fancy thing? And we got married on the 10th of July 2010 at Khyber Pass at the Auckland Masonic Centre in full regalia. So that was the first Masonic wedding ever.
That was fabulous. I knew there was something out there. I'm still waiting for my invitation. I think it must have blown away. It's been great having you, mate. Thank you very much, and much success with the school, the Imperial School of Swordsmanship. It absolutely looks fascinating. I mean, I can't say I'm a great fan of swords. I'm a bit nervous about guns and swords and anything, but I know you love them, and your business just looks fantastic. Thanks for being a great guest tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And finishing off the show tonight, of course, is our regular contributor, Graham Houston. Graham, you've been looking to the skies and further, I believe, right?
Certainly have. Tonight,
yes,
a modern day, our era, pioneering hero.
Wow.
Edwin Eugene Buzz Aldrin.
Buzz Aldrin, beautiful.
Yes.
Second man on the moon.
Second man on the moon.
Yep.
On Apollo 11. Well, he was born in 1930, January 1930 in Montclair, New Jersey. And he was born into, I guess you could say, a military family with strong military connections. His father was a colonel in the United States Air Force. His mother's maiden name was Moon. She was Marion Moon, and her son became the second man to walk on the moon.
Unbelievable. Wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. And he was in the third intake of men that were taken onto that space program. And incidentally, he is the only guy with an astronaut with a doctorate degree.
I can remember, I think all of us can, in 1969, I was in physics class. Physics class, and our physics teacher, we didn't have any. I didn't like physics for a start. In fact, I'm hopeless at it. But he had the radio on. There was the radio about this landing, the moon landing, and I remember it. Always will remember it.
They spent about 21 hours on the surface of the moon, and
I didn't know that. 21 hours.
21 hours, and during that time, they gathered up and brought back to Earth about 46 pounds of moon rock. When he came back to Earth, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. They embarked on a 45-day international goodwill tour. Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins and Buzz Aldrin were awarded the Congressional gold medal in 2011.
There's one thing that's always struck me, maybe you saying something before about they landed and they spent 21 hours on the moon. Whenever you see Neil Armstrong coming down, first of all, he mucked those words up, but leaving that aside, whenever you see him coming down, where was that camera? I mean, did they go down first, set up the camera, and then run back up again, and then say, okay, we're ready, and down we come? I wonder if that's what happened.
Buzz Aldrin was one of 9 Masons who were astronauts. Wow. There were 9 astronauts who were Masons, and the head of the NASA was a Mason. So that gives rise to some of those theories.
So they thought there was a sort of conspiracy.
A conspiracy there, and they try to use the name to do. Now, here's a couple of interesting facts. Buzz Aldrin took up to the moon a small flag, handmade silk flag from the Masonic Scottish Rite. It was about 22 by 30 centimetres, and brought it back and gave it to the Scottish Rite Temple, and that is in the temple at the moment.
And I believe he also was the first person to eat and drink on the moon.
Right. Correct.
He had the little communion, little quiet time, right?
Yes. Now, when he came back to Earth, the Grand Lodge of Texas formed a lodge called Tranquility Lodge, number 2000.
Wow.
And that lodge is located, it's named after Tranquility Base, which was the site where Apollo 11 landed. Yep. And it's based in Texas until such times it is able to create and have its own meetings on the moon.
On the moon. That's
and they have a very distinctive apron, which you'll see, and they meet on a quarterly basis.
Interesting.
And there's a very strong connection with the Masonic fraternity, the space program, and certainly with one of its greatest guys, Buzz Aldrin.
What a great choice, my friend.
Thank you.
Back to Earth next week?
Back to Earth
next
week.
All right, see you soon. Well, that's our show for this week. Thank you for joining us. Remember, if you'd like to know anything about Freemasonry, please do go to the Freemasons website, which is freemasonsnewzealand.org.nz, or otherwise just call the telephone number listed on the screen. Until I see you again, have a great week.